Hey friends, welcome back to Fantasy Wash. I read all of Sarah J. Maas in 1 month, and today we are going to talk about it. Let's jump in. So I've been talking quite a bit about my romantasy journey on the channel so far. It all started with Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, and then I was told that I needed to read ACOTAR because if I liked Fourth Wing, then I was definitely going to love ACOTAR. And I talked about this in my ACOTAR video that I did, in which everything that I saw for ACOTAR was very negative on YouTube in general. I wasn't someone that was on TikTok, so I wasn't really involved in the book talk community and seeing all of the praise that was being given to these books, but I decided to give it a go and see how I felt about it. Spoiler alert, I ended up absolutely loving it and devouring it. I read all 5 books in a week, and then I ended up rereading 2 of them immediately after I finished the series because I liked them so much. I was then told from that point on the way you need to read Sarah J. Maas. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit today, in which the reading order that is suggested for Sarah J. Maas, if it's necessary to follow that order, and in general, what my feelings and opinions were on each of these works. Now, my reading experience is my reading experience. It's not other people's, but I'm going to tell you how I felt about it. So if we're looking at reading order, it seems to be that the general consensus is that you start with ACOTAR. Once you finish that, you go into Throne of Glass, and once you are finished Throne of Glass, you enter Crescent City. Each of them is a romantasy-based story, but simultaneously they are all different in their subgenres. ACOTAR is very much our traditional fairy tale fantasy. In the first book especially, it is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then with each of the subsequent books it kind of becomes its own thing, but it is very much a story that is romance heavy and fantasy comes secondary. This is something that I found worked really well for her series. The first book of the 4 full books, there is also 1 novella, so there's 5 books in total, is the weakest of the 4 books, in my opinion. The best book of the bunch is book 2. Book 2 is amazing. And then oddly enough, the 4th full book, or the 5th written book, I think is probably on par with book 2, if not just a smidge behind it. But it tells the story of this girl named Farah, who is a human. She lives in a separated part of this country that is called Prithian. It is separated by a wall. On the other side of the wall are the Fae. She ends up killing this wolf and doesn't really know, but sort of does know, that it was a Fae, and because there is this arrangement between humans and Fae, she needs to go and live with the Fae now, giving up her human life, even though she maintains being a human. Over the course of the series, it takes you through relationships, trauma, PTSD, there is a war. It felt like Sarah J. Maas had a lot of big ideas for this story, and some of them I think work really well. I think a few of them are kind of plot hole-ish, but all in all, did not diminish my love of this series. I had such a good time with it. You can watch my ACOTAR video because I gush about it for basically 25 straight minutes. But from there, I was told that I needed to read Throne of Glass. And Throne of Glass and I have a bit of a weird relationship, and I think that this is not entirely uncommon for a lot of people. Throne of Glass, I would say, probably has, next to ACOTAR, the strongest following of Sarah J. Maas's work, if not the strongest following. A lot of people really love Throne of Glass, and I'm thrilled for you. But that is not to say that it is my favorite. Of her 3 fantasy series, it is my least favorite. And I think that this might be for a couple of reasons. Throne of Glass is an 8-book series, and it was her first published work, and I think that it showed. The series itself focuses on an assassin who is a teenager and is supposed to be the greatest assassin in the world. The premise alone is that. I felt like this story could have been condensed significantly, and it could have just been better. The main protagonist for this story is a girl named Selena Sardathian. She is our assassin. She has been trained at this assassin's guild since she was found as a young child. And the story itself is slightly problematic in the way that it's told, in that the way she wrote it is that the reading order is up for debate. So the first book in the series is technically called Throne of Glass, but Sarah J. Maas's third book in the series, which is called The Assassin's Blade, is a bunch of short stories in this world with Selena Sardathian that can technically be read first. So it's interesting as to where you try to start this series. I opted for the option in which you start with The Assassin's Blade, which is technically book 3, because it gives you a lot of background for the series going forward. I will say, I knew going into the series that a lot of people said it takes until about book 4 for things to really start getting good. And if you're thinking that's a big investment for an 8-book series, or just in general that you're going to give something 4 books that you may or may not like, I get it. The only reason that I chose to push through is because of how much I loved Akhtar, and I thought maybe when I got to the end of Throne of Glass, I would love it that much too. I did not. That is not to say that I didn't like things about it along the way. I felt that the character work in the latter half of the series became very interesting. The plot lines became much more interwoven, and I found that even though this is sort of still a romantic-y book, it is more fantasy heavy. We have different groups of people. There's witches, there's fae, there's humans. We have Wyvern in this story. There's a lot going on, but I didn't feel like it hit all of the notes that I really wanted it to hit. It's also an interesting book series in the sense that it starts YA, and I feel like that really shifts in the latter half of the series and that it becomes new adult. The language and the sexual content becomes much more explicit in the latter half of the book. It's not as detailed as Akhtar or Crescent City, but it's definitely a jarring juxtaposition to the earlier books. So I did find that interesting, that if she felt she was aging the books with her original audience, or if it was just that she kind of started to find her stride with writing romantasy more, that she wanted to lean into that more. My one major issue that I had while reading Throne of Glass is that the 7th book is not a POV from Selena. This to me was problematic because the character who was the POV for this book was infuriating and I hated him. I did not like him for many books. And then the fact that he got a whole book to himself was annoying and I didn't enjoy it, especially because book 6 ended on a cliffhanger and then you don't get that for another book and a half, basically. What has been offered by the great people of the internet is that people have figured out you can tandem read the 7th and 8th book, or you can tandem read the 6th and 7th book. I can't even remember. This is so complicated. I believe it was that the cliffhanger ended on book 5, maybe? And then it goes 6, 7 tandem. I will have all the information up on the screen. But needless to say, you can tandem read these books. And it makes it so much better because it doesn't feel like you are completely stuck in this one book forever, because that one book offers very little to the overall plot and it's a long book. So this to me was problematic for a number of reasons. I will say that the final book of the series, Kingdom of Ash, I found to be a very good book, not just in terms of good for this series. I thought it was an enjoyable book to read in terms of a final book for a fantasy series. I thought it was good, had a good time with it. All in all, that was my experience with Throne of Glass. But I then decided I hadn't had enough because people were telling me, and by people, I mean my girl Esme, and that was, you need to read Crescent City because you're going to really like it based on how you felt about Akhtar. So I want to talk about Crescent City now. I ended up loving Crescent City, and it is a totally different vibe from the other books, which is kind of what I've been saying. We've got our real romance heavy with Akhtar. We've got our more fantasy-based YA/new adult with Throne of Glass, and then Crescent City is urban fantasy. So she really kind of ran the gamut with writing different fantasy series, but all simultaneously having similar aspects to them and that they fall under the romantasy genre. Crescent City is, like I said, urban fantasy. It takes place in a modern setting, modern world, meaning we have cars, trains, cell phones, electricity, television, all of the things that we currently live with in the Western world are available to our main character. And this story I was really struggling with in the beginning. It took me about 200 pages to really get into Crescent City, and once I did, I had an absolute blast with it. I really liked that we had different groups of people and that we have fawns, fae, we have werewolves and packs and alphas, we have different type of angels, and that there is a very distinguishable hierarchy in the society, and it's all kind of murky, which is something that I really enjoyed. Now, the general consensus for most people that have read Crescent City, and this is not me saying this is the general populace, is that book one is their favorite, and that they really love book one, and a lot of them really hated book two, and a lot of people are mid on book three. I had a great time with all three books, and my personal feeling is that book two of this series is where things get more fantasy heavy, and I understand for people that aren't necessarily heavy fantasy readers or high epic fantasy readers that they might have struggled with the second book in this series, because she really does shift it into a lot more of our typical fantasy tropes. We've got a lot of scheming, a lot of politicking going on in the background. We're introducing new groups of peoples, different dynamics, and she established, and I thought, a very good villain in this series. And then book three, in certain ways, felt a little bit rushed, but simultaneously, I was pleased with how it all kind of came about. But there is still a lot of story left in that world to be told. So I am curious as to what is going to happen when she decides to get back to it. Now, I want to talk about spoilers for a couple of seconds, so we're going to jump into our little spoiler section here. If you do not know this, every book that Sarah J. Maas has written in this romantasy genre is all part of the same universe. They are just in different worlds, but sometimes they can be connected to one another. There is a scene in the final Throne of Glass book where we see that Selena, aka Aelin, who is the long-forgotten princess, she falls into this world that is the ACOTAR world, and she sees Rhys and Farah see her, and she kind of sees them from a distance. And then there is a very blatant crossover in the Crescent City series where Bryce, our main female protagonist, falls into this other world, and it ends up being the ACOTAR world. She runs into everyone from the Night Court, but her main interactions in this story end up being with Nesta and Azriel, which I thought was an interesting pairing, but it's going to be interesting to see how she goes about this now in the ACOTAR world, because there are consequences from what happened in the Crescent City series that I think that they will have to be addressed in ACOTAR. I'm curious to see if there's going to be overlapping timelines and just how she's going to handle this. I know that a lot of people were not pleased with this development, but I didn't mind it. So I can officially call myself a masochist now, because I read all of these books in a very condensed period of time. I had a great time for the most part. I will say I struggled quite a bit with aspects of Throne of Glass, but I love ACOTAR so much, and I already want to reread it. And I really loved Crescent City, so much so that I will probably reread the first book at least this year. I think that Sarah J. Maas does certain things really well, even though she has a very formulaic approach to writing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because depending on what you're looking for in your fantasy books, in your romance books, in your romantasy books, she's generally hitting the same notes over and over. She's just executing them differently. So if you feel like you really like aspects of ACOTAR and you like aspects of Crescent City, chances are you will find those intersections happening in her works, and therefore you will have a good experience reading them. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read Sarah J. Maas, what you think of her works in general, if you've read her entire catalog, what's your favorite, what's your least favorite. Are you like me in that you struggled with Throne of Glass, or where did you kind of fall on that? Where did you fall with Throne of Glass? That's basically what I know. If this is your first time here, welcome. This is Fantasy Awash. If you want to help support the channel, you can always hit like and subscribe, and can leave me a comment down below. If you want to come hang out and chat about books more, you can find my Instagram information below, as well as my Discord, in addition to a link for fun romantasy merch, because who doesn't want good stickers in their life. As always, appreciate you hanging out with me and appreciate you spending your time with me, and I will see you next time. Bye.